Please remain standing for Pastor Tunde and the prayers.
O Lord God, we thank you for the help through this council year. Thank you for the counsel and assistance you have given to all of our councillors and leaders as they have led us and managed the affairs of our borough. Though we have had a very turbulent time in economic crisis, but you have ensured that you sustained our borough, that we haven't fallen apart. As we mark the first year of the war in Ukraine, it has been you who have not allowed the evil that started it to overcome our courage. Thank you for the small and the big victories in Ukraine and all over Europe. We remember the pain of the earthquake in Turkey and in Iran. Tonight we pray for peace, that peace will break out and joy will break out in all of our lands, our communities, our homes. Grant us healing from all of these difficulties that have affected people in our communities, towns, and borough. We pray that the meeting tonight will be smooth with your divine wisdom and counsel. Lord, bless the mayor, the leader of the council, the opposition leader, and all of the councillors. We honor and praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. Please be seated. And welcome to today's council meeting of the 23rd of February 2023. Can I just remind everyone to please switch off their mobile phones, and if everyone could check them, thank you. And we shall start on the order paper. Apologies of absence.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have apologies from Councillors Lackmana and Sweeting.
Thank you. Everyone has the minutes in front of them. Has everyone received the minutes and agree the minutes? Thank you. That's the minutes agreed. Do we have any declarations of interest, please? Take that as no declarations of interest. And now we come to my announcements. I cannot believe that we're coming to the end of February already. Time has just gone so quickly, and this is my last full council meeting, so I just can't believe where it's gone. We have been continuing the Mayor's work in all of the community over the past month, and this week all the mayors from across the boroughs were invited to Uxbridge Battle of Britain bunker. They were invited to a tour followed by a really interesting talk by one of our archivists in the auditorium. And this was followed with a vintage tea and lunch. Along with that, it was accompanied by one of our singers, Nikki, and she sang some songs from the era. It was a huge success, and our thanks go to all the team who really organised an amazing event. The mayors and deputy mayors came across all boroughs, and they were really impressed with Hillingdon's Battle of Britain bunker, and they'll be sharing and encouraging their residents to visit Hillingdon. January the 27th marked the remembrance of the Holocaust. Hillingdon took part in this solemn occasion at St. Margaret's Church. The service was led by our local rabbi, attended by our multi-faith groups and leaders, and our forces and residents. It was a moving occasion, lighting candles in memory of the lives that were lost. February also saw the introduction to our new Deputy Lieutenant for Hillingdon, Manju. It was an honour to meet her and welcome her to our borough. We learnt about Manju's background as a cook and the amazing work she undertook during COVID. It was a wonderful opportunity to talk about how we were able to increase and improve our working partnership together across the borough for our residents. I'm sure you will all meet her very soon as we come to the future events marking the King's coronation. Our last fundraising event will be held on Friday the 10th of March, and we will be celebrating St. Patrick's Day. It is going to be a joyful evening of entertainment. We have Irish singers, we have our local Irish dancing studio, and of course we'll be followed with an Irish stew. Please do support this final event. If you are unable to make it, please do donate to the Mayor's charity, and thank you for those who have donated already. The last two events sold out within 2 weeks, so I would encourage you to get your tickets very early. My most important thanks and notice tonight go to my family, Marios, Polly, Ellie and my mum, for all your support over the last year and coming into what they call the final furlong as the months go on. Thank you also to my colleagues and councillors, Ian Edwards and Nick Dennis, for covering the work as well. So thank you. It's just been so amazing and so quick. I cannot believe it's gone that quickly. So thank you for listening to the announcements. We will then carry on with the meeting, and we will go to order number 5, the report from Head of Democratic Services.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just before we refer to the leader, just one slight amendment to the report as printed in the agenda paper. At the top of page 2 is detailed. Members are asked to agree the programme meetings with a change of date of Cabinet in January next year from the 4th to the 11th.
Thank you very much. These are going to be moved by Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Madam Mayor. And it is very hard to believe that this is your last full meeting as Mayor. The items before us in agenda item 5 are in 4 parts. I do not believe they're contentious, and so with your permission, I will move them together. Section 1, or item 1, is a straightforward noting of 2 urgent decisions taken since the last council meeting. Item 2 is the members' allowance. Each year we publish the members' allowance scheme, and at the last council we agreed to uplift the members' basic allowance to £12,014 as recommended by the remuneration panel that reported in January, but not to increase it in line with the 2022-23 staff pay award. It was also agreed to freeze the special responsibility allowances paid to other members. It is recommended to the Council that the freeze on the special responsibility allowance continues for the 3rd year, but the freeze on the basic allowance be removed, and that the Council revert to the former practice of increasing that allowance in line with the staff pay award to be agreed for 2023-24. At item 3, as has been noted by the Head of Democratic Services, this is the straightforward programme of meetings for the following year, and to note the change. And the 4th sub-point is a tidying of the Constitution to clarify the delegations under planning to the planning committees and to officers. I move those recommendations.
Thank you. Is that seconded?
Madam Mayor, I second and reserve my right.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Is that agreed? Thank you. We now move on to order number 6 on the papers. And we will go to Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wish to move the suspension of Council Procedure Rule 14.4, which allows unlimited speaking time this evening for the mover and seconder of the main motion, and also for the principal speaker and mover and seconder of an amendment. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mills. Is that seconded?
I second that, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. Is that agreed? Thank you. That's agreed. Okay, we now move on to number 6, the Cabinet Budget, and we have Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's also almost exactly 12 months ago that we last met in this chamber to consider the budget proposals for this authority. In fact, it was on the 24th of February 2022, which also happened to be the very same day that Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine. The disastrous consequences of Vladimir Putin's insane actions have had a profound and lasting impact upon European territorial security, with its political landscape and economic stability also challenged on a scale not so experienced since the time of the Second World War. When introducing this budget last year, I predicted a fast-moving environment which would confront us with hitherto unexperienced challenges. That has certainly proved to be the case in the last 12 months. Indeed, a combination of the massive surge in energy, fuel and food costs, pressures on public finances derived from currency weakness, economic sanctions and the supply of armaments have all taken a toll on the national economy. A year ago, it was already clear that Europe's economies were entering a phase of increasing inflation, largely derived from quantitative easing, in other words, national governments printing money, largely in order to finance additional public spending to address the pandemic. This much we were able to recognise in our forecasting. However, the war in Ukraine has added fuel to the inflationary fire and provided us with levels of cost escalation that just could not have been predicted. In December 2021, the reported Consumer Price Index annual rate of inflation stood at 5.4%. By April 2022, this had risen to 9%. And by October of last year, we had reached what many believed to be the peak at 11.1%, with the latest reported rate for January 2023 falling back to 10.1%. Madam Mayor, this is the highest rate of inflation which this nation has sustained for over 42 years. With effect from the 1st of April 2022, central government funding for COVID-19 ceased. Yet the legacy of COVID remains with us to this very day in terms of escalating social care demands and reduced income as our residents adjust their working and living practices, in many instances on a continuing basis. We can therefore reasonably expect that many aspects of the COVID legacy will become permanently embedded in our future operating model. Social care continues to consume a huge proportion of every local authority's budgets. Indeed, it currently accounts for a considerable 64% of Hillingdon's total service expenditure. Independent of the COVID influence, these services and their demand have increased, and indeed the per-cost client cost of residential care has escalated relentlessly. Cost of living pressures have had an adverse impact upon families and businesses alike, with the UK hovering on the brink of an economic recession, with the inevitable direct impact on social care needs and collection performances for council tax and business rates. During the year, interest rates have risen in an attempt to counter inflation. A year ago, the Bank of England base rate stood at 0.5%. Today, it stands at 4%, with expert forecasters suggesting that at the very least, a further 0.5% increase looks probable. Madam Mayor, at 4%, we are experiencing the highest interest rates in this country since October 2008, almost 15 years ago. These factors have conspired to create what can only be described as a perfect storm for local authority finances, particularly and most significantly as central government grant funding has been and will continue to run flat, thus not providing the necessary levels of increased support to enable local authorities to balance their ever-increasing cost budgets. Madam Mayor, last year I reported that local government settlement was for 3 years. Today, in actual fact, we have received a final settlement which in reality is comprehensive only in terms of the upcoming financial year 23-24. Thus, we are confronting material uncertainties in our levels of central government funding for the later years of our MTFF, and I will return to this subject later in much greater detail. By April 2022, it was clear that the pressures which I've already described would have a profound impact upon our financial position without a substantive response. I therefore requested that our officers carry out a comprehensive reappraisal of our financial position. The conclusions from that report that followed were that we were heading for a major budgetary gap in the current financial year 22-23 and the next 23-24, unless we took major and rapid corrective action. It was clear that to a very material extent we were unable to influence the income levels in 22-23, and that therefore the most effective measure open to us was the development of a major cost savings programme. The savings programme, which has subsequently been developed, yields cost reductions amounting to £46 million across the full term of the MTFF. And in the history of this authority, that is unprecedented in its scale and reach. Madam Mayor, I will leave it for my colleagues, who will speak shortly, to comment on the specific implications of this savings programme and other aspects of the MTFF as they affect their own portfolios. But there are a number of extremely important overriding principles which have been adhered to in its development. Firstly, we've looked to modernise the way in which we deliver services, making the maximum use of current and proven technology. We've identified, and will continue to do so, ways of consolidating the use of teams of people and premises in our delivery of services, particularly where there is an overlap in those particular services. In identifying such consolidations, we have prioritised the distinct needs of communities and localities within the borough. We've sought to manage and contain high-cost demand for frontline services by the greater use of early intervention measures, particularly in areas such as social care and homelessness. We have looked for opportunities to commercialise our operations wherever possible. We have challenged the cost-effectiveness of many bank office functions and have driven out duplication and overstaffing. We have determined that elective services provided by the council, which are not used by all residents, should at least break even at a direct cost level, with, of course, a direct influence on levels of fees and charges. As an overriding principle, we have used these cost-saving measures to ensure that key frontline services are protected and that our promises to our residents are fully observed. Madam Mayor, the scale and reach of these savings measures is, as I have already said, unprecedented in the history of this authority. And therefore I must thank Tony Zeman and the entire corporate management team for the positive and supportive way in which they have engaged in this process. This has brought about the need for fundamental cultural change in the way in which this authority and its officers go about their business. I must emphasise that all the savings measures contained within the MTFF have been fully assessed and evaluated. They are highly specific, and hence I share with our senior officers a confidence that they will be delivered. I also firmly believe that we can do more to generate further cost savings, and that these will be necessary to strengthen our reserves in what will continue to be a difficult and challenging economic environment ahead. I will therefore be initiating a further savings programme in the very near future. It is inevitable that many of the measures identified within the savings programme could not be delivered immediately. Indeed, some of the more complex areas requiring business process re-engineering still lie ahead of us, and thus it was inevitable the number of elements of cost escalation will be sustained in the current 22-23 financial year. We have therefore successfully absorbed these cost increases from within our earmarked reserves. I make no apology for such usage. Earmarked reserves are created to provide this authority with the resilience needed to negotiate financial pressures. However, it is now pleasing to report that recent budget monitoring reports for the current financial year are reflecting stability and predictability. Situations such as the one that we found ourselves in earlier in this financial year precisely address the justification for deploying earmarked reserves. We have used them properly, but now we must reinforce them for future release. I must emphasise that throughout the course of the current year, there has been no use or depletion of general balances, which, by the way, we will also seek to strengthen. Madam Mayor, aside from the very small number of specific and long-planned allocations, such as the funding of the Older Persons Council Tax discount, I must emphasise that this forecast does not make use of earmarked reserves in delivering a balanced budget going forwards. A number of key principles underpin the medium-term financial forecast. We have preserved, supported and invested in our frontline services, and we will continue to do so. We recognise the significance of our frontline services and their importance to our residents. Hence, there have not been, and there will not be, any cuts to key frontline services. Indeed, our philosophy is that we will provide whatever it takes in resources and funding to ensure that high-quality service is delivered. We have recognised the domestic cost of living pressures that our residents all face and have sought to minimise further costs, albeit, sadly, that the reality is that some cost escalation is absolutely inevitable. We have kept the promises made to residents in our manifesto and have sought to maintain the supportive environment available to our older residents. We continue to invest in our infrastructure, leisure facilities and schools through our capital programme, which benefits from our strong balance sheet. We are following policies which will enable us to preserve and build our reserves and balances in order to continue to face whatever the future brings with confidence. We continue to operate stringent and comprehensive financial controls of the highest quality. And fundamentally, we will always tell it how it is, in a direct and open, transparent dialogue with our residents, and we will not shy away from the difficult but necessary decisions that have to be made. Madam Mayor, we prepared and submitted a consultation budget in December 2022. Residents and the Council Select Committees have received the opportunity to consider and comment on this. As I've already said, it has been necessary to implement some tough decisions, and these are particularly in the areas of council tax and fees and charges, both of which I will comment on in greater detail later. Whilst a small number of residents responding to the consultation did express disappointment with the increases put forward, it is notable that the vast majority of residents were not moved to comment. And I contrast this to the substantial wave of resident disapproval which the Mayor of London's ULEZ expansion proposals have recently stimulated. We have made relatively few changes to the consultation budget, and members can see a table which fully summarises these on page 6 of Pack B of the Cabinet Papers. The key changes are that the finalised local government settlement and better care fund yields an additional £3.8 million, and that this has been added to earmarked reserves. However, the greater uncertainty in central government funding in the later years of the MTFF, which I've already alluded to, has caused us to make an additional cost provision of £5.1 million, which is our best estimate of the cost of implementing the fair cost of care reforms, which have now been delayed by the government for 2 years. We are also now able to take account of an additional dividend of £750,000 in the form of a dividend from our captive property development company, Hillingdon First Limited. In the light of a challenging property construction market, where both staff and materials costs have increased at rates exceeding CPI growth, we have added an additional £20 million contingency to our capital programme. And this, together with a slower collection rate of capital receipts from planned asset disposals, drives our debt costs up by £1 million. Madam Mayor, in summary, this brings us to a position whereby we can propose budgets which are fully balanced for the financial years 23-24 and 24-25, with a very slightly increased budget gap, the budget gap being £9.7 million, which represents an increase of £200,000 for the years 25-26 to 27-28. Madam Mayor, it should be noted that officers estimate that £5.5 million of the £9.7 million budget gap in later years can be attributed to the uncertainty as to government grant levels in the last 3 years of the MTFF, where quite rightly a prudent and arguably pessimistic position has been taken by us in terms of future funding levels. Turning to our service expenditure forecast projections in the MTFF, we will experience an increase in annual costs from £251 million in the current financial year to £300 million by 27-28. That is an increase of £49 million, and that is after we have realised the benefit of our £46 million savings programme, which I have already described. So to be absolutely clear about it, if we had not initiated the savings programme, our costs would have escalated by £95 million. Inevitably, the largest single factor in this cost escalation is inflation. This is projected to amount to £60 million across the 5-year term of the MTFF, with £32 million worth of increases falling within the first 2 years of the forecast. Of these increases, £15.3 million is in respect of social care costs, while £10.7 million is derived from anticipated pay settlements. A further £5.8 million is expected to arise from the renegotiation of outsourced contracts. Whilst the Bank of England projects that inflation will fall back to 4% by the end of the current 2023 calendar year, we have retained higher rates of inflation within our forecasts, and that actually is 10% in each of the first 2 years. Firstly, because staff pay settlements are agreed retrospectively, and secondly, because a number of the authorities' outsourced contracts are in a queue waiting to be negotiated. Furthermore, it is my view that there may prove to be an undue degree of optimism in the bank's projection, and hence we may find that higher levels of inflation remain with us for somewhat longer. The growing demand for council services is also a key factor, with this adding £23 million to our costs by 27-28. Adult social care placements, support for looked after children, and support for children with disabilities collectively accounts for £15 million of this increase, whilst a further £2.9 million is derived from population growth and its influence upon the cost of waste disposal, and a further £2.1 million is attributable to the increase in provision for homelessness. Within our financing and corporate budgets, the largest influence for change is in respect of our debt service costs, which are projected to increase as a result of the progressive upward increases in interest rates recently made by the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee, and the changes in the level of debt required to finance part of our capital programmes. This generates an increase in debt service costs of £6.5 million by 27-28. However, we've been sheltered from the very worst impacts of interest rate rises by our long-term borrowing strategy, which I will comment on later on. Concessionary fares, which are recharged to us by the Greater London Authority, are forecast to return to pre-pandemic levels, thus adding £4.1 million in cost by 27-28. Whilst our costs will see a major increase across the life of the MTFF, it is very clear that the only income source which we can count on to provide us with growth is council tax. This is projected to grow by £35 million across the term of the MTFF, with £28 million of that being derived from increases in the prevailing rate, and the balance of £7 million being derived from an expected growth in our population of taxpayers. Whilst business rates have benefited from a reappraisal carried out by the Valuations Office, we expect any benefit accruing to Hillingdon to be eliminated by the need for provisions to address valuation challenges and declining collectability as a direct consequence of the worsening economic environment. As I've already mentioned, the trajectory for central government grant funding over the next 5 years is flat. Madam Mayor, the government has given a clear indication to councils that council tax should be used to the maximum extent possible to finance cost escalation. And accordingly, for the next 2 financial years, it has increased the referendum limit to 5%, being 3% in respect of core council tax and a further 2% for the adult social care precept. In common with the vast majority of councils in England, Hillingdon therefore proposes to set its core council tax at an increase of 2.99%, with the social care precept being set at 2%, This will have an impact of increasing Hillingdon's council tax for a Band D equivalent home to £1,326.32, or an increase of £1.21 per week. Hillingdon charges the second lowest level of council tax in Outer London, with only Newham setting a lower charge. If we consider the current proposals after including the London mayoral precept, more of which later, the total 23-24 council tax bill for a resident in Hillingdon with a Band D property will be £1,760.46, whilst the equivalent cost in Labour-controlled Barnet is £1,836.17, in Labour-controlled Ealing it is £1,840.89, in Labour-controlled Hounslow it is £1,881.52, in Labour-controlled Brent it is £1,924.45, and in Harrow, which very recently passed into Conservative hands, and where a battle continues to remedy the long-standing Labour legacy, it is £2,162.80. So to be clear, a Band D council taxpayer in Hillingdon will be £402.34 a year, or 22.8%, better off than a Harrow resident. And that is even before we consider the comparative impact of fees and charges. Consolidated within the annual council tax costs that I've referred to is the London mayoral precept, which is a levy on all London Borough residents. For 23-24, Mayor Sadiq Khan's precept will amount to £434.14, and hence represents 24.7% of a Band D resident's total bill. The London Mayor has increased the precept this year by a hefty 9.7%.
Shameful.
And this follows hard on the heels of the 8.8% increase which he imposed in 22-23. Indeed, since Mr. Khan assumed office as London Mayor 5 years ago, the precept has increased by an extraordinary 56.7%.
Shameful.
Madam Mayor, you might imagine that Mr. Khan's proposals to levy a tax of £12.50 a day on non-compliant vehicles under his ULA's expansion plans for Outer London might be enough to bridge the gaping hole in his finances, but clearly not. If ever you were seeking evidence of the tax and spend profligacy of the Labour Party, here it is. Not only does the Mayor try to repair the gaps in his transport and policing budgets with his excessive taxation, but he's also pursuing an expensive TV media campaign in his vain attempt to justify his expanded ULEZ policy. Madam Mayor, we should also be aware of the consequences of poor financial management and the uncontrolled spending policies that have forced 3 councils in England to speak a special dispensation to increase their council tax by rates in excess of the referendum rate. In Thurrock and in Slough, the increase will be 10%, whilst in Croydon it will be 15%. It is also clear that many other authorities are struggling to achieve a balanced budget. Let us return to the sanity and control which Hillingdon Conservatives have achieved over the years. Over a period of 10 years, up to 2018-19, this administration operated a freeze in council tax rates, whilst at the same time preserving and in many instances enhancing frontline services. Today, that freeze is worth a saving of £5,081.18 to a Band D council taxpayer who lived in Hillingdon throughout that 10-year period and continues to live here today. Over the period from April 2008 to December 2022, the Consumer Price Index, the generally accepted measure of inflation, has increased by 46%. Over the same period, the population of this borough has increased from 262,500 to 305,000. That's an increase of 16.2%. By contrast, under Hillingdon Conservatives, council tax has increased by a mere 19% over the same 14-year period. Madam Mayor, here is the evidence of the great value that Hillingdon Conservatives are providing to our residents. Furthermore, the introduction of the council tax older people's discount has yielded a saving for a Band D household of £6,197.25 for any resident who has participated in the scheme since its inception. If ever you were looking for evidence of our great support for our older residents, here it is. As a borough, our fees and charges are amongst the very lowest per capita in London. Our policy is that fees and charges should not be profit-making, but should simply cover the costs of service provision. Where services are used by some residents but not others, then it is right to levy a charge on those who use the service, rather than to ask all council taxpayers to subsidise the activity. Conversely, where a service is universally used by residents as a general principle, we will continue to absorb its cost within council tax. There are some fees and charges which are designed to penalise breaches of rules. For this category, fees and charges should act as an effective deterrent, and there is therefore no justification for keeping charges low. As part of our work which has contributed towards the savings programme, it has been necessary for us to consider these principles at some length, particularly in the context of the fact that historically Hillingdon has applied essentially minimal increases to our fees and charges and the structures over preceding years. This has brought about a situation where we are firmly and clearly entrenched in the bottom quartile of the table of fees and charges levied on a per capita basis amongst London councils. Indeed, statistics indicate that we have the third lowest fees and charges on per capita basis of all outer London boroughs. This MTFF therefore contains proposals that will bring about a reset in our fees and charges such that they will be increased by an average rate of 30%. Whilst this will permit us to achieve a full cost recovery on the provision of elective services, it will still leave us as the third lowest of outer London councils on a per capita basis, albeit with a reduced gap to our neighbouring boroughs. In making these changes, we recognise their significance. However, when spread across a typical year, their impact on residents will not be substantial, and they must be viewed in the context of the significant discount which Hillingdon residents have enjoyed and will continue to enjoy in comparison with their residents in neighbouring boroughs. Excuse me. In future years, I would expect to see fees and charges move by no more than the prevailing rate of inflation. The significance of a stable financial position and the strong management that it enables the council to invest in frontline services and infrastructure with confidence. Excuse me. A confidence that these consequences of its actions and decisions are beneficial to our residents, are measurable and understandable in terms of their impact on our financial position. This Conservative administration believes that council tax received from our residents should be used for two purposes only. Firstly, to cover the necessary costs of providing and investing in an excellent frontline services and infrastructure, and secondly, ensuring that the council has adequate balances and reserves to meet any unforeseen costs and obligations which may arise from outside and uncontrollable factors. Hillingdon carries a level of balances which are assessed professionally as being appropriate to and consistent with our economic environment and identified risk profiles. At the end of 22-23, in just over a month's time, Hillingdon will hold £45.2 million in general balances and earmarked reserves. And this, of course, is after we have absorbed the pressures of 22-23. This represents a stable platform for our activities and our risk environment as assessed. Of the foregoing balances, £26.8 million is in general balances and is satisfactorily within the target range set by our Corporate Director of Finance for 22-23, that range being £20 million to £39 million. The equivalent review of our balances and reserves policy for 23-24 has reset the lower level of general balances at £22 million and the upper limit at £41 million. This approach illustrates the prudence and care which characterises all of Hillingdon's financial decisions. And as a matter of policy, we will therefore look to set future balanced budgets without resorting to or drawing down general balances. Indeed, it is our policy to build them further in order to increase our strength and resilience. The strength of our balance sheet enables us to refresh and maintain investment in our infrastructure, our leisure facilities and our schools through the General Fund Capital Programme. And we are committed to expenditure of £369 million over the term of the MTFF. Major features within this programme include the following. £35 million for the new Useley and West Drayton Leisure Centre, £20 million on reconfiguring the Uxbridge Civic Centre, which in turn will generate cost savings, income and capital receipts, £25 million on an outdoor sports and leisure facility, which will replace the HOAC facility which has been displaced by HS2, £15 million working capital funding for our captive property development business, Hillingdon First Limited, to finance pipeline housing construction projects. £47 million on school buildings. £51 million investment in the borough's road network and transport infrastructure. And £25 million on initiatives to reduce the borough's carbon footprint. This represents a firm commitment to enhancing and maintaining the environment which Hillingdon residents enjoy. And it will be achieved with incremental borrowing of only £51 million, which will take our general fund debt to a peak position of £259 million in 24-25, which is comfortably within our borrowing limits and entirely affordable in terms of our debt service obligations. I must also add that our overall effective interest rate on our borrowings currently stands at 2.59%. That is below the current Bank of England base rate of 4%, and that is a reflection of our careful and well-informed long-term planning. Madam Mayor, there is no requirement for this council to consider and approve the dedicated schools grant at this meeting, so therefore I will keep my comments very brief. Last year, and particularly at election time, the opposition were trying to tell anyone who would listen that this authority was on the brink of bankruptcy as a result of the position within the dedicated schools grant. The passage of time has proved how wrong they were. The dedicated schools grant is under control, and we have already received £12.9 million from the Department for Education under our agreed plan. And by the way, Hillingdon is most emphatically not in a state of bankruptcy, and furthermore, it will not be so in the foreseeable future.
Hear, hear.
Electioneering of the very shabbiest sort this may have been, but it does also shine a light on the complete absence of financial acumen and good judgment within the ranks of the party opposite. Madam Mayor, I now turn to our housing revenue account. The housing revenue account is a ring-fenced fund that currently comprises an estate of 10,239 council houses. The HRA has a stable capital platform with reserves of £15 million and an operating positive variance against budget of £68,000 in the current financial year to date. The revenue budget for 23-24 will see rents increase by 7%, being the statutory ceiling introduced by central government in the light of the current inflationary environment. This generates an increase in rental income in 23-24 of £5.5 million in monetary terms, while costs are forecast to increase by £5.9 million, the largest factor being payroll costs, which have moved in accordance with inflation. Across the life of the MTFF, inflation is projected to increase costs by £8.8 million. The revenue account budget for 23-24 yields a balanced budget after a contribution of £21.6 million is made towards our capital programme. Over the MTFF period to 27-28, the HRA capital programme comprises a spend of £565 million. This programme will see the creation of 890 new homes and an investment of £195 million in the improvement of investment of existing housing stock. Over the period of the MTFF, borrowings to finance this programme will increase by £174 million, with the peak level of borrowing being 340 million, which is reached in 26-27. Once again, this stays within acceptable levels and debt service costs are comfortably assimilated. Madam Mayor, as I've already stated, our policy is that we are absolutely committed to continuing to do whatever it takes to maintain, indeed enhance, the comprehensiveness and quality of our frontline services. There will, of course, continue to be bumps in the road derived from the inevitable pressures derived from continuing high growth in our population, the ever-climbing demand for key services, including social care, and, of course, inflation. We've reached this highly satisfactory budgetary position today through an approach of vigilance, expertise, early responsiveness, and honesty. We will continue to monitor trends in economics and demographics closely. We will respond to the challenges they bring with solutions. We will not shy away from difficult decisions, and we will always tell it how it is. This budget preserves the manifesto promises made by Hillingdon Conservatives at last year's elections, and we will continue to honour those pledges. We recognise that the current cost of living pressures are challenging for everyone, and that it would be therefore wonderful if we could completely shelter all residents from the increased cost of running the authority, but that is just not possible. We are realists, and it is inevitable that we will all, as residents, have to share in an increased burden. However, it should be of comfort to us that here in Hillingdon, the cost of council tax and fees and charges are amongst the very lowest in outer London, and that is a position that we will strive to maintain. Yeah. Madam Mayor, this is an excellent budget for this authority and for our residents. It is careful and prudent in its approach to the risks that it faces, but it is forward-looking and dynamic when making the right provisions for our residents. It is a budget for investment in our frontline services, and investment in our infrastructure. It is a budget which will allow us to rebuild our reserves and strengthen our resilience. In closing, Madam Mayor, I must acknowledge that this budget has been a considerable collaborative effort by our excellent team of officers. I've already recognised the contribution made by the corporate management team, but this budget also relies heavily on the expertise of the Finance Directorate. It is important to understand that the Finance Directorate doesn't just take care of accounting. It also comprises financial planning, treasury, transformation, procurement, counter-fraud, pensions, revenues and benefits, and internal audit. I therefore wish to offer my most sincere thanks and appreciation to our Section 151 officer, Andy Evans, to Ian Waters, Gemma McNamara, Matthew Kelly, James Lake, Alex Brown, Andy Goodwin, and Chris Mayo, and all their colleagues, all of whom have worked long and hard to great effect in delivering this endeavour. Madam Mayor, I therefore move recommendations 1 to 16 as set out in section 6 of the Order of Business. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Goddard. Is that seconded?
Madam Mayor, I second the motion and reserve my rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the Labour amendment in order to ask the Conservative Cabinet to think again. I move this amendment to assure Hillingdon residents that Hillingdon Labour are listening and will work with you to build a better borough. I move this amendment to assure Hillingdon residents that Hillingdon Labour are the party with the courage to prepare and take action against climate change. Climate change being the biggest challenge facing humanity, which is already having a significant impact on our residents. I move this amendment to make clear to this chamber that Hillingdon Labour has heard the frustration and dismay of many Hillingdon residents who have contacted us in their hundreds about how they see their community spaces and activities dismantled, how they struggle with the cost of living caused by this Conservative Council and Conservative government. Our amendment shows a better way for the Conservative administration to maintain and improve Hillingdon Council services without risking the Council's finances. I therefore urge everyone in this chamber, but especially those Conservative backbenchers, to support our amendment. Madam Mayor, Before moving into the detail of the Labour Group's amendment, I wish to express my thanks, sincere thanks, to the finance officers and other officers who assisted us in the preparation and in balancing this amendment. Our council officers are extremely stretched, and as there are less and less of them doing more and more, we thank them in the extra effort they put in. But also I have to ask myself, why is this? It's because this Conservative administration continually have the inability to dig themselves out of the hole they created, and also the hole created by their Conservative government. The administration is making quick-fire decisions. They're firefighting, rather than long-term decisions to build a better borough. In contrast, Hillingdon Labour continue to work with residents. Hillingdon Labour continue to work for residents, and Hillingdon Labour continue to work to support residents over the long term. We have heard many times in this chamber that development decisions that residents do not agree with, or decisions that do not benefit them or their communities, should be brought as objections in planning applications or through the ballot box. Well, last May, Useley residents overwhelmingly rejected the Conservatives at the ballot box. And in doing so, with their petitions and objections, rejected the Conservative plans to build on what was covenanted land on Falling Lane and Otterfield Road. Our amendment removes the proposed capital development to allow the Cabinet to go back to the drawing board, but this time when they do, they should take time to listen to residents, to work with residents, and to build long-term plans for residents to help residents to thrive in their communities. Residents are concerned at the Conservatives' quick sale of council assets to the highest bidder for a quick buck, and the overdevelopment of Useley needs addressing. Residents have a number of suggestions that will help the administration to co-design these publicly owned spaces, and this amendment gives the Cabinet time to co-design them. Removing this project from the Council's finances does not risk anything, as there is enough housing in the Hillingdon First Limited and HRA pipelines to bring forward what is needed to fulfil housing targets and financial targets over the medium term.
Madam Mayor, could I raise a point of order, please? Throughout Councillor Goddard's speech, the whole chamber was quiet and listened attentively. The Councillor Mather's speech has only just begun, and there's mutterings, chunterings, laughter, all sorts of stuff from that side of the chamber. Could we please show respect for each other? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coney. It's noted, although I didn't feel that that myself was an issue, but it is noted, and I'll take that on board.
Madam Mayor, it's time for tea. Well, for tea rooms anyway. This amendment provides the Cabinet another opportunity to pause, to avoid another hasty decision. The Rural Activity Centre has so much potential. Potential to provide training and employment opportunities for autistic people, opportunities to provide comfort and affordable spaces for residents, for them to enjoy and take the opportunity to purchase things they may need to enhance their gardens for Hillingdon in bloom. It may have escaped the Cabinet's notice that tea rooms and garden centres go hand in hand, so closing one will affect the other. And once things are gone, they rarely come back. Therefore, our amendment provides the finance to pause for 6 months, halting the tea room closure and other cuts to allow time to review the whole site and the cross-partner working. Just 75,000 will allow departments to work together with stakeholders in order to provide business development support to identify opportunities and efficient cross-working, and also to look at generate enough income in the site over the years to sustain it. In the long term, these efficiencies through partnership will lead to savings, not cuts or provision. Hillingdon Labour are happy to work in partnership with the Conservatives to assist them in how to meaningfully work in partnership with the community. As this amendment highlights, their attempts to work in partnership with the community just haven't worked. Look at the bowls clubs and their misguided attempts to work in partnership. It could almost be perceived as slightly heartless. Members of the bowl clubs are predominantly older. Bowls provides them an opportunity in an accessible way to engage in physical activity and increases socialisation. Of course, it's open to all ages, so many benefit from the health and wellbeing opportunities. The Labour amendment reinstates the provision for the council to maintain the bowls greens, with a review to provide 30k of savings. This allows the administration's proposal. This removes the administration's proposal to get rid of the maintenance support, where they buy the equipment and do, as in the bowls clubs, and do the work themselves. This cold approach to cuts shows that the Conservative administration just does not understand their communities or their needs. In addition, I want to state that as part of the usual duties, our amendment will task officers to support the clubs to increase the use of the bowling greens and sustain their vital role in our communities. Just before Christmas, Hillingdon Conservatives cruelly put parents through unnecessary anguish. They made a knee-jerk decision to close 3 early years centres that many rely on for childcare. That was before they made a U-turn due to the fact they hadn't properly consulted families. Not only did this show weak leadership with knee-jerk reactions, but highlights the continual lack of engagement with residents. I truly worry how many residents have really been engaged who use those childcare facilities with the proposal of this sharp increase. Therefore, as a mitigation from the harshest of increase, this amendment enables a small contingency of funding to enable some subsidy for those who genuinely cannot afford to bridge the gap from the old fees to the new fees. These knee-jerk decisions have consequences. Many of them may be a knee-jerk to the 12 million they have to find to plug the gap in the designated school grant. The Conservatives' cost of living crisis is impacting us all, and many households are struggling with rising bills, energy, food prices and other essentials. According to the Office of National Statistics, at the end of last year, around half of adults in Great Britain were reporting buying less when food shopping, with lower income households hardest hit by rising food costs. 6 out of 10 adults in Great Britain said they were using less fuel due to the cost of living crisis. Adults in rented accommodation and those who earn less than £30,000 a year are more likely to experience energy insecurity. The effects of this include financial insecurity and also impact their mental well-being. This amendment combines our climate change action plan strategies with long-term support for residents against higher energy bills, as well as investing in our housing stock. The Labour amendment complements the Conservatives' HRA extension schemes by upgrading it to make sure properties are energy efficient and have renewable energy capabilities. It is a few dozen or a dozen properties where this can be piloted and trialled in order to see if we can save money by working our stock towards net zero targets, but also instead of having different building schemes where we're ripping out one part of the house to build an extension and a few years later ripping something else out to make it more energy efficient. There's cross-department working together, there's collaborative approaches in order to use this pilot to make these spaces and places net zero. This will not only enrich housing stock, but help us help us reach our net zero, I've said it too many times now, and save the tenants money in the long term. The improvement to the budget with this scheme, combined with the scheme the Cabinet is suggesting, will help resolve some overcrowding and affordability for those residents it's piloted for. It is also part of our long-term focus that we hope the Cabinet will adopt in order to look at sustainable and renewable sources for different council properties and housing stocks. And that's why we will be looking to invest £300,000 in a renewable energy scheme in a supported living scheme. This starts off with a pilot at one site to assess financial viability, but it will result in the council saving money on energy bills for the communal areas, and equally residents saving the same. It stops us seeing residents fall into fuel and financial hardship. The reduced service charge should also have a positive impact on clients' contributions in this area and produce a saving for the general fund. This amendment costs out for the Cabinet the ambition and drive they need to achieve their targets. With Hillingdon Labour, the focus is long-term preparation and savings, not short-term panicky decision-making or a lack of future preparations as seen in the current Conservative administration. This amendment is equipping the Council to meet its net zero targets. The short-term thinking of the Conservative administrations means they are not preparing for the transition to carbon zero. Not only is this an example of weak local leadership, but also financial irresponsibility. It was the Conservatives' local inaction on the vehicle fleet in years gone by that was pointed out to them by us several times, and their lack of innovation that meant they've been unable to tackle climate change and look at how to make their fleet sustainable. We have seen a fuel spike let's start again, done it twice now. We have seen a fuel price hike. We have seen technologies that would have helped them be sustainable to deplete. So now may not be the right time for us to change our fleet to electrification, but we need to start doing the work. We need to understand if the Harlington Road depot needs to be transitioned into electric or other means. In this amendment, we've set aside capital money for the future, but feasibility money now, so that we know the answers, so that we know what needs to be done, rather than just sitting there not knowing what to do. And I've no doubt that in a few years' time, under a Labour government, we'll be in a much better economic place in order to do this in an affordable way. In the absence, Conservative administrations, joined-up thinking, lack of innovation, lack of truly planning action to get to net zero, we have made sure that there is a lot of opportunity for innovation. Officers need faith that the administration wants to encourage innovation and that it's willing to innovate to achieve net zero. And residents need the same. That is why the capital has been slightly reconfigured to allow innovation in climate change for council projects, but also to create climate change sustainability options through the Chrysalis Fund. In 2024-25, this amendment is proposing 25% of the Chrysalis Capital Programme budget promotes and targets sustainability as well as community benefit. For example, some solar panels on a sports club, enabling that sports club to be sustainable, have renewable energy, but also benefit it financially. It enhances our physical environment. Madam Mayor, Hillingdon Labour are encouraged that the Cabinet continue to incorporate our previous amendment ideas in their budgets. We're encouraged to see the feasibility studies to place the Battle of Britain bunker and other heritage sites into charitable trust, as well as their adoption of the idea to develop community hubs. Sorry, our idea even. However, this amendment plugs the gap where the Cabinet's vision is limited. It helps to enhance what is needed to have a truly vibrant community hub model. Libraries have the huge potential to be community hubs in every town in this borough, but the short focus of this Conservative administration is cutting them to the bone and closing them part of the week, putting this model at risk. Hillingdon Labour vision is to use the libraries as a multi-service setting, providing truly locally based resident services of what's needed. If the Council take on our proposal a small £150,000 reversal on library cuts, then they'll be able to realise the vision of the community hub model, and it would deliver further savings in the future. This amendment invests in the community hub model by piloting other aspects too, resourcing community hubs to support local communities to build mental health resilience. Where the mental health pilots are in 3 locations, it's hoped that through that engagement, where there are those who don't quite meet the NHS support thresholds or even our own, that they'll still be able to build up resilience and self-confidence to prevent poor health outcomes. This impact in the long term will mean that there's lessening demand on council and NHS services for this small cohort that quite often need extra support to thrive in the area they live. Through the hubs model as well, this amendment invests in reversing the majority of the cut to the community safety team, instead investing 60,000 in a training officer to support community hubs to focus and understand community safety issues, and for services to be provided in a local touch point through the community hubs for residents. This role will decentralise the community safety team. It will help prevent antisocial behaviour, resolve local issues as officers are more familiar with their own patch. These locally based officers in community hubs who understand their communities will be able to support residents in a holistic way, rather than the maze of multiple departments that unfortunately is the nature of local councils. This will provide the resolving of issues on a street-by-street level. This is the chance for the Conservative administration to really get what they've been wishing for. A chance to be connected with residents at a local level, rather than the current ivory tower approach to designing services. Ivory towers do not help residents resolve common issues they face, as I'm sure many in this chamber have received numerous complaints about the increased number of houses of multiple occupations. They may be a shortcut way for the Conservatives to increase council tax, as each room is charged at Band A, generating 4 times council tax for a house that may have been at Band E or higher in the past. It may be another shortcut for housing targets in highly dense areas, but it is destroying our local communities when there are too many in the same place. And although we may not have the power to do much about that, what we can do is mitigate some of the effects. There are some good HMO landlords, but without a constant standard to work to, this council is often left picking up the pieces, and in the case of HMOs, that's picking up the pieces of fly tipping, that's picking up the neighbourhood disputes and the noise complaints. It's not pleasant for those tenants and neighbours, both within houses of multiple occupation, but alongside. So therefore, this amendment provides a constant, proactive approach that will provide the council future savings. Employing an officer to monitor HMOs, reducing the negative impact on the neighbour and the cost of the council. This officer can work with landlords to resolve waste management issues, antisocial behaviour, but also, on those occasions when it's needed, provide information to tenants where there are problems with matters such as energy meter disputes. To future-proof this work, the officer will also investigate the feasibility of a HMO landlord standards registration. This item is a no-brainer, as the cost of the officer will be charged back through the HMO application fees through a full cost recovery model, and will contribute to future council savings through early prevention. Madam Mayor, this amendment also suggests changes to fees and charges. Nothing has frustrated residents more than this huge hike in fees and charges from cradle to grave. Parking permits, burial, theatres, childcare, community activities, gyms, swimming, hall hire and blue badges. Residents are effectively in this knee-jerk reaction being taxed twice this year, with 30% increases in the main across the board. Nothing says panic more than blanket unaffordable fees to residents. The administration need to finally realise that their short-term financial management has not been so sound. Residents are angry at the Conservatives' poor planning. This amendment provides the Cabinet chance to rethink this knee-jerk reaction so that it doesn't bring harm but helps residents of our borough. This amendment links to the rises of blue badges. It links to the first parking permits and theatre rates, just some of which we'd love to amend, but we often don't have the details of what the Conservatives are planning with their huge savings programme. Protecting our residents and helping our theatre-using groups sustain to use council facilities is important. So we are curtailing the extremes of the administration's fees programme through some minor amendments, taking away some unreasonable charges to the theatre-going public, but more so those community groups that use them, groups that will disappear when the fees make it no longer viable to use those theatres. And then what happens to our theatres? Parking permits, which I must remind in parking management schemes, that residents don't openly want them often, but they have to have them because airport firms are parking on their street because they live by a station or a high street. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity. And therefore the increase or the introduction of a £75 parking permit charge for the first permit is unreasonable. A few years ago, residents paid £40 to have 2 parking permits. Now they would have to pay £185. The above inflation rates of knee-jerk, panicked reactions when they struggle to balance the books is what is causing residents the most misery with this budget, especially when they're charging for the implementation, often paid by Transport for London, and the enforcement, which residents rarely see. This is both unfair, unnecessary and shameful. A small administration fee for the permits, which are mainly done through digital processes, would be reasonable. But to do it in this way just shows how the Conservatives are happy to see community groups fold, theatres close, and they're happy to overcharge residents as they struggle with the cost of living. Unlike the Conservative administration, this Labour group is willing to transparently identify all savings that we wish to make through this amendment. And it's time for the Conservatives to stop funding PR to cover up their inadequacies and start keeping a clear funding path that supports our residents. This amendment proposes that we reduce fees in certain areas. It also proposes that we make savings. But before we get there, this amendment proposes that Council invest in a team with a primary focus of securing additional funding from external sources. This does exist in part where external bids are brought in, but it isn't done in a systematic or in a particularly prudent way. This could help both the Council's own expenditure and that of developed partnerships with the third sector, with a larger view of securing savings for the Council through preventable services. The investment of just £180,000 in this team can be funded from capital receipts under government direction, with a view of the team becoming self-financing and generating net benefit for the Council from 24-25. This model has been successful elsewhere, for example where councils have worked with third sector organisations in joint bids or through third parties to collect significant amounts of money from the National Lottery or other sources, and then use commission models to deliver services through these partnerships. This Conservative administration continues to miss opportunities for funding. They even failed to bid for levelling up funding. They're letting communities down, and in these difficult times we need to maximise the funding available to councils and communities. As I said, all of our costings in this amendment have been worked out with the finance team and are visible. To balance this amendment, we are proposing a number of saving proposals, reducing the spend by £1,041,000 per year. The digitalisation of Hillingdon people saves £156,000. As we move from digital, more residents are able to access online communication. But for those who aren't, we would also print off a short run of 5,000 Hillingdon People magazines to be distributed through libraries. Further things that will be done will be bid reviews with the communications team, saving £100,000, and a slight reduction in the Mayor's office budget. This amendment in our savings also shows strong leadership and recognises that the older person's discount is no longer sustainable. The Conservative administration are proposing to take it out of earmarked reserves this year, £1.3 million. And then what are we to see? £1.3 million of cuts year after year until the scheme ends in 20 years' time. But the scheme isn't going to be ending in 20 years' time. It's actually closed already. And there is a disparity in ages. For those now coming to 65, there is no scheme. For those a few years older, some get some discount, some get the other, and some get a slightly greater one. What we are proposing is to start to harmonise the scheme, so that those on Scheme 1 transfer to Scheme 2. This would save the Council each year £735,000 to maintain services at just the cost of £1 a week for those moving from Scheme 1 to Scheme 2. 55% of those who get the discount are in Bands E and above, and no one on the scheme gets council tax reduction. If a resident moves from Scheme 1 to Scheme 2 and struggles, then the council tax reduction scheme can give them 100% discount, up to 100% discount, rather than the 3% discount that would still be offered. Hillingdon Labour do not want older residents losing their discount completely, but fear this panicky administration, with its policy to balance books as quickly as possible, will remove the scheme altogether next year because they simply cannot afford it. In times when residents need us to prioritise our spending, excessive publications and marketing is a wasteful use of taxpayers' money. So cutting marketing is a no-brainer. It allows the opportunity to invest in community hubs model, increase libraries, support our bowls clubs, reduce the harshness of administration's fees rises. And if Conservative colleagues vote against these tonight, they are voting against safer communities in favour of excessive marketing. And I would ask, again, where are their priorities? So these savings allow this to be balanced. These long-term looks enable us to support future council savings. But also, this Labour budget amendment invests in improving experience for our residents, particularly our council tenants. The council tenant customer experience and the speed in which repairs are resolved is something that this amendment looks straight into. We need to have more control of our repair services, and under control of Hillingdon Conservatives, Hillingdon Council is at risk of being a bad landlord. Cold, mouldy properties are dangerous. We've heard those risks, we've had those debates in the chamber. And we do get constant complaints as councillors about delayed repairs, about multiple sites visits again and again. It is wasting our housing revenue accounts money. This has to stop, and the Cabinet need to act. So our amendment provides scope for review to improve customer service and in-source contracts on a natural basis, maximising efficiencies and show our residents that we can be good landlords. And as we hold our landlords in HMOs and others to a higher standard, we have to be able to demonstrate that ourselves as a family. Two examples sit in my mind. One, where through an outsourced contract, one of our elderly residents, or vulnerable residents, was left without a heater, even though that's the policy when the heating goes during the winter. And the other one, which was a clear waste of our money and would frustrate us all, where a leaking pipe coming into the exterior of a building and damaging the brickwork, a simple solution, which was basically to close it off, led to 5 different visits from 5 different contractors, one travelling all the way from Scotland for that one job. How is that efficient? It's examples like these that will frustrate all of us here, and examples like these which means we need to start having greater control of our repairs to our housing stock. So in summary, just as a reminder, if any Conservative councillors vote against this amendment tonight, they are voting against our climate change action and preparedness that is needed to achieve our carbon zero targets. They are voted against modest fees rises for residents in a cost of living crisis. They are voting against community groups in theatres and bowl clubs. They are voting against the opportunity to keep libraries open and to keep the Rural Activities Sea Centre open. I urge everyone here to vote for the Labour amendment. It is a chance to move away from a panicky Conservative cabinet and to learn from our residents, to support our residents, to work alongside our residents and to improve our council's financial viability for the long term. Madam Mayor, I move.
Thank you, Councillor Mathers. Is that seconded, please?
I second and reserve my right, Madam.
Thank you, Councillor Curling. We're now speaking on the amendment. Do we have any speakers? Councillor Lavery.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Labour amendment manages to duck all of the key challenges with reviews and is financed off the back of our most senior citizens. Our most senior citizens. It contains uncosted sums for electric vehicles. There is a sensible way to manage a vehicle fleet, and that is that you replace vehicles as they fall due by virtue of age or lease expiry. The council procurement team will already cost both diesel and electric options where these are available. It should be recognised that currently, the larger the vehicle, the more limited the options. It does not need a consultant to tell us if electric vehicles exist or whether they're currently robust. And if I take the example of dust carts, most of you will know what I mean, having seen an example last winter of a fleet where its batteries failed. In terms of our heavy fleet, there are in many cases no viable alternatives. There are also knock-on costs from reduced payload and the efficiency of operation with battery charging time. The way the amendment reprioritises the carbon budget is a fudge. I would rather spend our carbon money where there is clear evidence, such as retrofitting buildings, rather than spending money on fashionable but unproven technology. Our library plans are thought through and a sustainable operating model based on usage which has declined post-pandemic. They are already a key feature of our communities, and plans coming forward from this administration will make them even more so. I don't need to be told how to do this by the Labour Party. I'm sure the £150,000 cost of their proposal was not plucked from thin air, but who knows? In the very short time available, given the late presentation of the amendment, we estimate that £250,000 is a more realistic option to maintain staffing levels while allowing lunch. In terms of value for money, only our busiest library here in Uxbridge has significant lunchtime footfall. That is the only one, and I have got the statistics. On Saturdays, our Tier 4 smallest libraries are already quiet and do not justify the additional hours, given that they already operate at the period when most people would be out in those high streets. We will oppose the amendment. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Councillor Mills?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Always a delight to be called for you to speak on these occasions. Labour's amendment is tinkering at the edges. It's on the basis they've got to come up with something to make it sound plausible, and they try and present it as being very reasonable and very sensible. Bear in mind we're talking about a budget here, Madam Mayor, of over £260 million being spent. You know, 150,000 there and 75,000 there, or 750, whatever the numbers are very much at the edges. But I'd like to also to pick up on the fact that Councillor Mavers talks about, well, the council tax discount, we don't want the elderly to suffer, it'll only be £1 a week. Well, two things. They actually will be the main people that will benefit so adversely, almost vindictively, as a result of your proposals, because they in effect will be paying double council tax. And I noticed that you quoted, Madam Mayor, Councillor Mavers quoted a number of things in terms of cost of living impacts and what have you, but he seemed to admit one of the most important parts of the research that most of the think tanks, and especially the left-wing think tanks, which I'm sure he reads rigorously, indicate that it is that age group, the 70, 75 and 80-year-olds, who suffer most from cost of living pressures. So what does Hillingdon Labour Party propose?
Put it out.
Yes, to actually hit that group of our society with a double tax. It's almost as if, Madam Mayor, they're saying the council tax discount has now got so expensive, and unfortunately, because you haven't died off, we're going to have to charge you twice. That is what it's about, and that's the reality of this amendment. And on that grounds alone, we will oppose it. But let us just consider their track record. Last year, the same Councillor Mavers and Hillingdon Labour Party, with their financial acumen, were telling us we are on the brink of being bankrupt, as my colleague said. Yep. Did it happen? No. Is it going to happen? No. Have we got sound financial management still? Yes. Will we get sound financial management under a Hillingdon Labour Party? No. Thank you very much. In terms of the Rural Activities Centre, they talk about moving that 75,000 and it will keep the tea rooms. Madam Mayor, may I refer them to look at the December Cabinet report and actually work out where the tea room funding came from? It's from the grants budget report, and in there it says quite clearly when you read through it that HACs have enough money in their balances to keep it going. This amendment can be summed up as follows. We want the elderly residents of Hillingdon to pay more tax under Hillingdon Labour so that we can substitute the tea room cake at the tea rooms. That's what they're proposing. That's why we will oppose it.
Thank you, Councillor Mills. Councillor Core.
Madam Mayor, it's not surprising that the friends on the opposite side are averse to anything fair, sensible, or which has residents at its heart. It's regrettable that they'll just vote it down because we've proposed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Core. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I must say that I believe this to be the most callous of amendments I've heard. It shows me that they don't listen to themselves, and they're preaching about the need to protect those on low income. It shows that Labour has not changed. It remains the party of higher tax and wasteful spending. This amendment is another shopping list of a handful of ad hoc growth posts to be paid for largely, predominantly, on the backs of the very oldest households in this borough, those over 70 years old. These new posts that they wish to create, a mere handful, will deliver no tangible outcomes to the services we provide to our residents, but will add to our costs, creating unnecessary bureaucratic processes and unnecessary investigations. Last year, Labour proposed freezing council tax for everyone that would have added millions of pounds to our financial challenge. This year, they want to reverse course, and they want to take even more council tax than we are proposing, but they only want to do that from the over 70s.
Shameful.
This flip-flopping clearly shows their inability to forward plan and underlines their financial incompetence. Labour's budget will, if it were ever agreed, double the increase in the council tax for those households over 70 years. It will increase our 4.99% to 9.6%, and it will apply to all those over 70 households with a joint income as low as £14,500 per year, substantially lower than the average household income in Hillingdon and way below the benefits cap. To levy this increase at a time when state benefits are not keeping up with food and energy prices, the inflation compounds the callousness of the Labour group. Last month, they turned their back on low-income families and workers when they refused to fight the Mayor against his decision to expand ULEZ, placing party loyalty above the interest of residents. And tonight, they have shamefully, vindictively turned on our oldest residents. Councillor Mathers, you have the opportunity to withdraw this amendment, and Councillor Curling, you have the opportunity to show leadership in your speech to now withdraw also, knowing the full impact that this will have on our oldest people in the borough. This is a straightforward grab of their money to pay for your largesse. Madam Mayor, if this amendment proceeds to the vote, Labour will not only underline their reputation for financial competence, but will add to that the reputation of being plain nasty. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Are there any other speakers? So, yes, back to Councillor Curling.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I second the Labour amendment in the knowledge that this is one of the most challenging budgets that this council has faced during the 20 years that I've had the privilege of being an elected member. In drawing up the opposition amendments, it is clear that we're in such challenging times, not only because of the current financial crisis due to COVID, the Ukrainian war, Brexit, high inflation and a looming recession, but also because of the savage cuts that the Conservative government has imposed on local government, the legacy of decisions made by previous Conservative administrations in Hillingdon, and the lack of vision and innovation shown by the current administration. Under the current circumstances, there are difficult decisions to be made, and no one can get away from that. We have all had to make tough and maybe unpopular decisions, but we believe that things can be done differently, and as the opposition, we can only amend the budget. We can't present a full alternative budget. So our amendment can only scratch at the surface of the type of change that we believe is necessary. Our amendments, therefore, are very much of the context of we wouldn't be starting from here. But that doesn't mean we can't demonstrate priorities that truly put residents first, find new ways of doing things through innovation and recognising social value as well as financial value, thus giving residents true value for money. You have heard the details of the Labour amendments from Councillor Mathers, and these are drawn from the vision that the Labour group has to build a better Hillingdon by listening to all of our residents and placing the council at the heart of the community, a concept that appears to be totally alien to the Conservative administration. At the heart of the community means that we, the Labour group, would truly be working with residents and local businesses to ensure that new and innovative ways of doing things could be explored and implemented. This is why we're proposing that there's a halt to the closure of the Rural Activities Tea Room and instead is a review of this and other cross-departmental community sites. Full council now has the opportunity to vote to keep the tea rooms open. We also believe that the local community should play a vital role in the determination of what would enhance the area of the Useley Recreation Ground, former swimming pool and library sites. So our amendment allows for the council to do the right thing and vote to remove this from the capital programme. This is what we consider to be putting residents first. It's a shame the Conservative administration would rather ride roughshod over the views, opinions and wishes of local residents. Our libraries are also a vital part of our community, with overcrowded housing and other issues caused by the unaffordable housing crisis. Libraries are often the only place that our young people can study. We believe that the lunchtime closures should be avoided, and our amendment, plus innovation with regard to community hubs, would ensure that we get the best use out of our libraries. Indeed, it is encouraging to see that the Labour manifesto commitment of community hubs are now finding their way through to the Conservative proposals. However, we feel that much more could be done, and our amendment provides for more holistic community hubs, including a pilot for mental health support. Community safety is also an area of concern that we believe should see some positive innovation. The Mayor of London's Office for Police and Crime is moving towards a more focused neighbourhood policing with the introduction of a dedicated or a reintroduction of a dedicated borough commander and an increase in police numbers. Our community safety team also needs some focus, investment and innovation. Madam Mayor, we also believe that the administration has taken a very simplistic view of fees and charges by uplifting most by 30% across the board. We feel this is too harsh in some areas. Local theatres are great local resources, and not only for entertainment, but also for community groups and activities. The 30% uplift here would mean that many amateur dramatic groups would not be able to continue. So our amendment gives this council the chance to vote to cut this uplift by 50%. Likewise, the administration's withdrawal of maintenance for bowling greens is very mean and something that contributes to the breakup of our communities. We believe that providing bowling clubs with a lawnmower and expecting the members to carry out their own maintenance is nothing more than insulting, and it will inevitably lead to falling numbers of club members. Our amendment therefore provides council the opportunity to vote for more sustainable bowling clubs that play a vital role within our community. Many of our neighbourhoods have petitioned for residents' parking schemes, and it's always been on the understanding that the first permit is free. We recognise that due to the poor financial management of the administration, this is no longer viable. However, we do feel that the cost for the first permit should reflect the admin fee rather than being used to pay for both the implementation and enforcement of the scheme. We are therefore giving Council the chance to vote for the first permit to cost £25 rather than £75. Likewise, we believe that to raise the cost of the blue badge by more than 300% is a step too far. We recognise that the cost has been £2 for a long time and that an increase is overdue, but we believe the increase should be a little less harsh, so our amendment gives Council the chance to vote for the cost of a blue badge to be £5 rather than £10 that the administration is proposing. The Labour Group has always been conscious of our duty to act on climate change, and to this end, our amendment gives the Council the chance to vote for some innovation investment in initiatives that will help us meet our carbon zero targets. As a responsible opposition, we also have to make some tough decisions in order to make the books balance. This has proven more difficult this year because of the issues I highlighted at the beginning of my speech. Probably the most difficult decision is to move those on Scheme 1 of the older persons discount to Scheme 2. The fact that there are 3 tiers of older persons discounts shows that this is a structural problem and that this and previous Conservative administrations have grappled with for some time in their efforts to phase it out altogether. Whilst this is something that we would not normally be suggesting, the structural issue that it causes needs to be addressed now, rather than cause a more severe jolt with the total withdrawal of the discount in a year or two's time. Madam Mayor, in our amendments we have shown that you don't have to rip the heart out of the community to make the books balance. Indeed, we believe that many of the solutions to our problems could be found by working differently with innovative ideas and by placing the council at the heart of the community. Had we been the administration, the budget would be totally different from the one that we are attempting to amend. But at least these amendments give the council the chance to vote to make a few improvements to the budget that the administration is putting forward. Over the years, the Conservative administrations in Hillingdon have consistently voted against our amendments, but then gone on to implement them and claim them as their own. In these challenging times, I expect this administration to do exactly the same, which reminds me of the Oscar Wilde quote, "Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery that mediocrity can pay to greatness." Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Curling. Councillor Goddard, you have the right to reply.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. At first sight, this amendment offers peripheral change at best. And perhaps we can believe that in actual fact behind it lies a tacit acknowledgement by the opposition that this Conservative administration has actually got the real substance of the budget right once again. However, at closer examination, what it reflects is the promotion of bureaucracy and overstaffing, features that our savings programme has tackled and will continue to work to eliminate. Let us also not lose sight of the fact that these costs are recurring, and so the true cost across the life of the MTFF is £5 million. So, the fundamental question is, how is the extra spending to be paid for? Well, perhaps, Madam Mayor, I should be grateful for the disappearance of Councillor Curling's magic money tree this year. Hillingdon people is already digitised. But however, if you're a resident who's not technology literate, you won't be able to read it. The proposed staff cuts in the comms team also suggest an aversion to full and transparent engagement with our residents. Perhaps this is a hint of how things might be were the administration of the council ever to fall to Labour. However, the largest ingredient in the attempt to deliver this amendment with a balanced budget is the draconian reduction of the council tax older people's discount, where 13,119 of our longest-standing eligible residents would be denied a pre-existing discount on their council tax of an average of £56 per household, although it could be as much as £112 for some households. If approved, this would be an annually recurring additional burden and is in essence the imposition of stealth taxation on our group of less affluent residents. Once again, Madam Mayor, this is a clear evidence of Labour's appetite for tax and spend. That this cohort of people, most of them relying on limited and fixed incomes, should be singled out to fund the opposition's spending is a disgrace. This Conservative administration has an admirable track record of supporting our older residents over the years to great effect, and we will not desert them at this difficult time of escalating costs. We will therefore oppose this amendment. But in the light of the implications of this for our older population, I too urge Councillor Mathers to reflect, reconsider and withdraw this amendment. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Goddard. Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I didn't see any backbenchers speaking against our amendment. I'm assuming they've either been whipped to silence or in silent agreement that their cabinet is making knee-jerk decisions, and they agree with the Labour amendment, but are too afraid to say so. Political rhetoric can only go so far, and unfortunately there's an avoidance from this cabinet to see their shortcomings. Some sensible, costed suggestions that make residents' lives better. Councillor Gollard, you're right, there is an acknowledgement in the budget from our amendment. It acknowledges that we, like you, cannot rip up the £12 million burden that you've landed us by not building enough special needs schools over time. And therefore the DSG we had to get involved and pay for, even with the Boris bailout. This is now putting our services at risk. The Cabinet Member for Environment's scattergun approach to fleet transition to zero carbon is really a misunderstanding of our feasibility study. It's to understand what options are available for the future. I'm happy to discuss that in a different way outside of the chamber. It's not just about electricity, it's about carbon zero. If we prepare now, we'll be ready in the future. I'm also happy to look through any plans they may have to be a critical friend on how we can get to carbon zero. I'd also, as Councillor Mills seems to suggest, happily look for all of the counts and books that you have in order for us to provide a full budget amendment or alternative if we were so allowed by the Constitution, which you're happy to change. I would also disagree that the flippant way in which the impact this has on residents has been ignored. The person who gets kicked out of the library at lunchtime because they can't access the computer they need in order to fulfil some of their job-seeking or other lifestyle or life admin choices that they need to do on a computer and they don't have one at home. The person who is burdened with having to push the lawnmower up and down the green because it used to be paid for, but now their health is suffering because they have to continue to do it in their older age. And then we are the ones criticising for abandoning the elderly. Older people would still get a discount under this Labour amendment without cutting their services. And how will this Conservative administration fund this cut in the future? This discount in the future? It has to be through cuts, surely. They're happy for a low-income family to pay £75 to park their car outside their house, but for someone to afford it, they're not happy to charge them £1 a week. The legacies of Conservative control in Hillingdon have caught up with them, and they're struggling to get out of it by putting into early intervention and prevention services that we've suggested, and by making the tough decisions that we are able to. So what is a key service? Because they've cut everything they can, and the rest they have to deliver by statute. Our amendment calls them to be reasonable in the way they approach the finances, but as always with the Conservatives, there's no reason.
Thank you, Councillor Mathers. Justin Connell. Right, we will now be voting for the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For the benefit of our new members and for members of the public who might be watching, I'm sure you'd be delighted to know that in accordance with the Local Authority Standing Orders Regulations 2014, a recorded vote has to be taken on every vote relating to the budget. So I would therefore be asking each member in turn if you are voting for the Labour amendment as moved by Councillor Mathers, seconded by Councillor Curling, set out on pages 6 to 11 of the Order of Business, against or abstaining. Councillor Abbey.
For the amendment.
Councillor Banerjee. Councillor Bassett.
For the amendment.
Councillor Bennett. Councillor Batt. Councillor Bianco. Councillor Bridges. Councillor Burles. Councillor Burrows. Councillor Rita Chamdal. Councillor Roy Chamdal. Councillor Chapman. Councillor Tubadar? Councillor Cawthorne? Councillor Curling? Councillor Davies? Councillor Dennis? Councillor Dott? Councillor Edwards? Councillor Farley? Councillor Gardner? Councillor Gaelic? Councillor Garg? Councillor Gill? Councillor Goddard? Councillor Gohill? Councillor Higgins? Councillor Islam? Councillor Judge? Councillor Kaur? Councillor Lavery? Councillor Lewis? Councillor Makwana? Councillor Mand? Councillor Mathers? Councillor D. Mills? Councillor R. Mills? Councillor Money? Councillor Nelson? Councillor Nelson West? Councillor O'Brien? Councillor Palmer? Councillor Punja? Councillor Riley? Councillor Sansapuri? Councillor Singh? Councillor Smallwood? Councillor Sullivan? Councillor Tuckwell? Mr Deputy Mayor? Madam Mayor?
Against.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That amendment is lost 21 votes to 30. We now return to the debate on the main motion as moved by Councillor Goddard, seconded by Councillor Edwards.
So do we have any speakers? Councillor Bianco?
Sorry. Madam Mayor, I'm pleased to speak in favour of this administration's budget proposal tonight and to add some detail to what has already been outlined by my colleague Councillor Goddard so far as it pertains to my portfolio. The Council's property portfolio, for which I am responsible, is the enabler for many of the Council's activities. So improving and enhancing it enables the Council to improve the services it provides to our residents. And I'm pleased to confirm on the back of that the Council is currently in process or underway with a number of major projects. And the first one, already described by Councillor Goddard, and perhaps the biggest, is the Hayes Regeneration Scheme, which is now well underway, and the first phase of which will be delivering 110 new homes by early 2025, and ultimately some 740 homes for Hillingdon residents. At the other end of the scale on the housing front, we are also in the middle of a new scheme to extend and refurbish existing housing stock to create larger units, something that is much in demand by our tenants. This new project has seen 6 new homes extended so far, with a further 7 underway or out to tender. And this initiative has and will deliver good value to the Council, as well as larger, much better insulated and more efficient homes for our residents. We are making good progress with the new leisure centre development in West Drayton, on time to be delivered in May 2024. Our renewal project at Cranford Park, being undertaken with help from the Heritage Lottery Fund, is due for completion late spring this year, bringing back into use the old stable blocks, protecting and restoring the listed cellars to the old house, and creating a new cafe for our residents to enjoy. The Civic Centre continues to be the hub of all the Council's services and has seen the resident opening of a new family centre as well as the relocation of the adult education facility and provides modern spaces and makes better use of our building. This year will also see the moving of Uxbridge Library into this new home in the Civic Centre, giving us the opportunity to modernise and re-energise our library offer to residents of Uxbridge. Elsewhere, we will see the redevelopment of Northwood Hills Library, bringing to that community a modern, fully compliant space for our residents and reaffirming our commitment to a fully functioning library service to all our residents. Madam Mayor, our roads and pavements continue to receive high levels of funding. In our continuing effort to lead the way in reducing our carbon footprint, we are currently testing new tarmac products laid at lower temperatures, which will significantly reduce their impact on the environment. We are hopeful that this new technology will be rolled out more widely this year following this trial. Madam Mayor, the Council is investing in the future for its residents.
Thank you.
And I support this budget.
Thank you. Councillor Tuckworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. what is clear is this is probably the most
Councillor
difficult...
Bianco, sorry.
Madam Mayor, what is clear is this has probably been the most difficult and challenging budget that this administration has faced in the past 2 decades. Difficult and challenging in the sense that both the economic climate across the UK and indeed globally is presenting never seen in a generation issues. These issues need to be faced through thorough assessments, clinical forecasting and an absolute focus on stabilising our financial position during this unprecedented period. This administration has a proud track record of over 2 decades in delivering sound financial management for Hillingdon's residents. In looking at what is faced, I can only describe this budget as prudent and realistic, where there is a clear intention to stabilise our financial position whilst protecting core service for our residents. Madam Mayor, it would be easy to ignore the many challenges around us and plot a financial course for the next 12 months and convince ourselves that the economic climate will fix itself with no further impact. This administration, supported by our officers, should be congratulated for taking tough decisions now that will see us have firm financial stability for the next 5 years and beyond. These decisions on changes in council tax and fees and charges have been made with careful consideration on how our residents will benefit in the long term. We have seen many examples of other local authorities who failed to take a long-term approach, failed to correctly assess the long term and failed to be courageous in their financial planning. These local authorities end up exhausting their reserves and slashing core services to the detriment of their residents. Madam Mayor, not in Hillingdon and not under this administration. Indeed, had last year's Labour amendment been implemented, we would have seen a far worse financial position that would have placed an unnecessary risk on core services. Residents across Hillingdon can be assured that this administration will not shy away from difficult decisions in the interest of protecting our long-term financial position. Whilst tough decisions have been taken, let's acknowledge that there is no impact on core services. Our social care commitments, network of libraries, weekly waste and refuse collections, world-class parks and open spaces, highways maintained, and many, many more core services that remain fully intact and delivered each and every day. Madam Mayor, in conclusion, Hillingdon, through this budget, remains one of the lowest in London for council tax and fees and charges. This budget also stands up to the most difficult financial climates and is focused on prudent forecasting, wise assessments and the ongoing economic uncertainties. Above all, it takes tough decisions now and will enable this administration to continue putting residents first long into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tuckwell. Councillor Lavery.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The financing of resident services is underpinned by the Conservative philosophy of sound financial management and putting residents first, giving some of the lowest council tax and resident fees and charges in London. We continue to have free weekly waste collection in a simple-to-use system across all types of waste. We will continue to roll out the food waste service in our flatted developments, as well as promoting this across our remaining properties. And if you don't have a food caddy, now's a good time to get one. New Year's Green Lane will be remodelled to increase the proportion of waste that is recycled and reused. We remain committed to 16 libraries, together with our mobile and home library services. These are essential community hubs providing access to reading, IT, as well as community signposting and support. In green spaces, we continue to have 67 green flags, which I think is a record I may have touched on before. In addition, we have a playground refurbishment programme across the borough. We already have 3 high-quality leisure centres, all of which have just been refurbished, and the 4th is well underway, on time and to budget. The new HOAC project is well advanced, and with a fair wind, we'll be sailing there in 2024. We remain committed to zero carbon by 2030, with projects including LED car park lighting, the retrofitting of key buildings to reduce our carbon use by 50%. We are improving the thermal efficiency of our housing stock with loft insulation, cavity wall installation and window projects, a fact I'm glad Councillor Mathers has now woken up to. Climate change has and will lead to less predictable weather patterns, and we're already seeing more intense rainfall. We completed 3 natural flood relief schemes in our parks last year and have further schemes in progress. I will touch on 2 other areas. We continue to work with partners to prevent rough sleeping and find a way for those who have been sleeping rough to get a sustainable housing offer. It was inspiring to recently visit Olympic House and see the magnificent work that Trinity are doing, getting former rough sleepers onto a sustainable path to support themselves. Those who avidly read the forward plan will have spotted the new planning enforcement strategy to ensure those who do not follow the rules will be penalised. Madam Mayor, I support the budget.
Thank you, Councillor Avery. Councillor Palmer?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Social care continues to adopt an early intervention approach to deliver better outcomes for residents and contain placement costs. The remodelling of our care contracts allow better monitoring of our service to residents, achieving better health outcomes and helping residents stay in their homes as long as possible. A comprehensive review of grants distributed to the voluntary sector with the aim of moving to a fully commissioned model meets our public health objectives and will lead to much more robust outcomes for our most vulnerable residents. Our reablement services are part of this work, helping residents manage after a period of illness. Our resident stays in hospital are shorter than any other London borough. Our hospital discharge team have the best discharge rates in London. Our partnership working with health partners is vital. We don't need a mental health pilot. We already have a crisis house partnership with our health colleagues and a Cove Cafe to support those residents experiencing a mental health crisis. This helps them prevents them accessing hospital. Our telecare line service, a shining example of helping our residents to live independently. For residents in care homes, we have teams to help prevent these residents having to go into hospital. Early intervention and prevention is key to reducing dependency on local authority services. The work carried out under our Better Care Fund is again aimed at joint working with our health colleagues to prevent hospital and care home admissions. Our joint partnership with our health colleagues and our public health grant and work, such as smoking cessation and falls prevention, again, illustrate our work to promote a good health and help avoid access to hospitals. Our Healthy Walk programmes allow all residents to enjoy a healthy lifestyle as long as possible. I stress again, this council continues to target funding for those most in need and invest in services with our health partners to promote residents' independence and therefore reduce dependency on local authority budgets. I support this budget. Sorry, that should have been local authority services. I support this budget.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Councillor Gardner, and you may remain seated.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, as an older resident who the party opposite claimed to help, and like you, Councillor Goddard, I tell it like it is, so fasten your seatbelts. Can the current leader of the council or one of his minions explain to us exactly which residents his group are putting first in this motion? Because it certainly isn't the residents that I speak to. And please spare me the usual vitriolic waffle about the Labour mayor and every other person you're clearly frightened of that lives in your head, ready to appear every time you need to throw out an insult in our direction, simply because you've got nothing better to say. And maybe for once, rather than playing that we can do what we want because we've been in control for ages, how's about for once concentrating on all the people in all the borough that we were elected to help, which in case some of you have forgotten, this includes those who depend on our services to live in safety in the borough and those who need appropriately sized and well-maintained housing for them and their families to live in, and the residents who rely on us to get local schooling that meets all their children's developmental needs. And of course, all the residents who sometimes are in crisis, who have a variety of problems, who depend on us to help and care for them when they need it most. I don't support the budget, so over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Hillingdon continues to provide children with a high-quality learning environment for the best start in life. This administration continues to deliver on rising school standards, with 91% of all our schools being rated good or better, and 96% in the primary sector. This includes outcomes for vulnerable learners, such as children who are looked after, and this budget will continue to help those most in need in achieving their age-related expectations. The admissions team once again are on track to offer every resident child a school place on time and as close to home as possible on National Offer Day. Strong financial management allows this administration to continue to invest in our schools through our capital programme on schools conditions and buildings related works. One of the Hillingdon Labour "let's make it up as we go along" factually incorrect stories of 2022 is that Hillingdon is not bankrupt, and the dedicated schools grant is now embedded in the life of SEN education. We continue to progress our plans to increase the provision of, in Borough, additional needs school places, and although the current pace is not of our choosing, I refer Council to the realities that Councillor Goddard outlined, Madam Mayor, previously. The Stronger Families Hub continues to provide a wide range of support services 24 hours a day. This one front door service with a multi-agency approach on the threshold offers preventative early help support to strengthen families and improve outcomes for children. There have been 32,000 requests for services since the doors opened. Keeping families on a statutory pathway is essential when hearing these numbers. The Holiday Activity Programme will continue this year to ensure that eligible children between the age of 14 to 16 and 18 with educational needs can access free school holiday provision during Easter, summer and Christmas breaks. The youth team last year worked with over 30 providers, ensuring it reached the greatest number of children and those most in need. The Hillingdon Music Service encourages young people to take an active interest in music. The service continues to provide excellent value for money. Adult education has hundreds of courses to encourage lifelong learning for everyone. And with the good planning and shaping of services, adult education, as Councillor Bianco said, is now in a brand new space at the Civic Centre, as well as outreaching into communities. Fees and charges have increased in my portfolio, yet they remain among the lowest in London. Indeed, some of our services are non-existent outside of Hillingdon. It's only right and prudent that this administration continues to seek cost-neutral balances for non-statutory services, as we know that statutory services are the most costly. I support this budget and put residents first.
Thank you, Councillor O'Brien. Councillor Nelson.
Madam Mayor, the budget before us is filled with many more don'ts than do's. For example, don't be a voluntary group for your funding is being sapped, putting your good work in perils. Don't be an autistic young person learning a trade at a rural tea room, as you are now redundant. Don't be bereaved, as the cost of laying your loved ones to rest will rise by and above inflation 30%. Don't be a driver wanting to park for free outside your own front door in a parking management area that you petitioned so hard for. Don't try to use the library services over lunchtime. You will find some of them shut. Policy failures and poor decisions over many years are at last coming home to roost, as it's a budget-only balance by being bailed out by our residents as they experience a huge hike in the cost of debt, marriage, birth, parking, art, nurseries, and withdrawal of support for our voluntary groups, and most vulnerable by selling our assets. Where is there anything in supporting our residents at this time of financial crisis, as it's a budget which demands more, and more from its residents when they have far, far less to give.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Cawthorne.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This budget represents, I think, a solid response to what is a uniquely challenging set of circumstances. We've got the perennial squeeze to local authority budget settlements. Local government really do seem to be the whipping boys compared with other public sector bodies who shout louder than we do. I often think we're more successful, or rather too successful for our own good in doing more with less, and we have been for a number of years. Couple that with unprecedented inflationary pressures, there is a need to make some challenging decisions tonight, giving us a budget the like of which we haven't seen for some years, but with some real positives at the same time, it has to be said. Received wisdom has it that these occasions tend to be the preserve of cabinet members, lining up to talk about the budget and the good things it represents in terms of their portfolios, and we've been hearing that this evening. But this year I also want to give a bit of a shout out for the role backbenchers have played in the formulation of this budget. It's important, I think, for the watching public to understand that ours is not unthinking support and not without a fair degree of critical friend challenge, not only with select committees, but informally, in informal circles too, contrary to what Councillor Mather thinks. Sound financial management, to coin a phrase, as much as anything, is about ensuring that partnering community organisations which provide services which support the well-being of our residents in one way or another and are facing reductions in funding are supported where necessary and appropriate through the transition to remain sustainable. We have a proud history of doing this since it's not in anyone's interest for them to fail, resulting perhaps in a greater call on council services and budgets, an outcome that benefits no one. And I know from relevant cabinet members they have ongoing commitment to this in respect of Bowls Club and the voluntary sector groups, which I applaud. That's how it should be, and I'm grateful for their engagement on this. Madam Mayor, we are facing into these challenges positively and in the right way. Meanwhile, the Hillingdon offer continues to be strong and better value than our neighbours across a range of services. Each day we see evidence of prompt officer responses to service requests, delighting our residents, and we should recognise their work in delivering services which we experience every day in members' inquiries, responses and in our wards. The measures in this budget will help sustain this in these difficult times. Contrast this, Madam Mayor, with a party opposite. As an opposition, Labour simply doesn't improve with age, with the usual failure to step up to the plate on these occasions with a coherent alternative proposition, serving up the usual dollop of posturing opportunism and gesture politics with which we've become all too familiar. Long may their years in opposition continue, because on this evidence, that's all they're fit for. Madam Mayor, I support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Cawthorne. Councillor Smallwood.
Madam Mayor, backbencher reporting for duty. I rise to support a budget built on solid foundations that protects frontline services and delivers the sound financial management the residents have come to expect in Hillingdon. I want to focus my comment tonight on fees and charge and additional fees. Now, Madam Mayor, I'm aware how much councillors opposite love to hear about the performance of their neighbours, so I wouldn't want to let them down tonight. And here's how they get value for money with Hillingdon Conservatives. I thought it was important and helpful to get colleagues to think about the starting point. What are the comparable fees and charges for the financial year 21 and 22 in comparison to our neighbouring boroughs? And Madam Mayor, the results are interesting. In the Labour-controlled London Borough of Hounslow, a resident per head can expect to pay around £213. In Ealing, around £247, and in Labour-controlled Brent, £324. But here in Hillingdon, it's £104 value for money with Hillingdon Conservatives. So even with these modest changes in this budget, this will place Hillingdon with the lowest fees and charges amongst our nearest neighbours and counterparts, and one of the lowest in London. Value for money with Hillingdon Conservatives. Madam Mayor, Councillor God and I are football fans. He described us as being in a league table, a relegation league table to be proud of. I didn't realise he was drawing inspiration from his beloved Chelsea when he was writing this budget, but long may it continue. And members opposite tonight have been talking about the first car parking permits. So I did a little research and I took my comparison a little further afield. And I stumbled across the London Borough of Camden, where they may know a folk or two, where the average first car parking permit isn't £75,
It's £183.55. We're not taking any lectures from Labour on value for money. And people in Ruislip tell me, Madam Mayor, that sound financial management isn't buzzwords, it's about protecting residents. It's about making sure bins are picked up weekly. It's about first-class social care, and it's about keeping tax low. And this budget makes the strong choices in tough times. Hillingdon Conservatives have never shied away from them, and we never will. Because we know what happens when we let Labour run this authority. Council tax hikes, a tax on our green belts, and millions of pounds of uncosted funding. We will never let the red flag fly in this borough, only the 63 green flags that we're proud of, and I'm supporting this budget.
Thank you, Councillor Smallwood. Councillor Corr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. At the time when our residents find themselves stuck between a rock and a hard place, with many having to choose between keeping their homes warm or their families fed, it is extremely disappointing to see our friends on the other side resorting to a self-congratulatory tone over this not-so-good news budget. It is, as expected at these difficult times, a bleak budget. A budget carrying the burden of historical financial mismanagement. A budget that gives no solace to residents they claim to put first. Madam Mayor, contrary to what has been claimed, the resident consultation of the budget shows that only 20% of respondents were satisfied with the budget proposals, which means 80% were not satisfied with the budget proposals. Only 19% of the respondents were happy with the value for money, which means 80% did not agree that they represent value for money. And where the respondents expressed dissatisfaction, these were primarily, of course, related to increases in fees and charges. The cost of living crisis has hit not only the working poor, but the working class in our borough. And instead of reaching out to the needy with a solution, they have decided to increase the cost of everything that affects them directly and indirectly. Besides the council tax, parking charges, excessive resident parking permit charges that have gone up, the already struggling residents will have to pay more for many other services. As mentioned by my colleagues, cost of getting married has gone up. Cost of renewing wedding vows, up. Cost of baby naming ceremony, up. Cost of citizenship ceremony, up. Madam Mayor, that's not all. Cost of cremating or burying your loved ones, up. Cost of disposing of the bulky waste, up. Cost of music services provided to schools, up. Cost of childcare in early year centres, up. Cost at young people centres, up. Cost of youth groups, up. Cost of many library services, up. All of these has a knock-on effect. Is it not antithetical to claim that they put the residents first? Perhaps they have mastered the art not only of misinformation, but of lip service too. Of course, we have to balance books. Of course, we have to run a financial viable council. Of course, these are difficult times. But even in the worst of times, our most vulnerable residents could have been and should have been at the heart of the very decision.
Thank you, Councillor Corr. Your time is up. Thank you, Councillor Corr. Your time is up. Councillor Punjab.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have heard a lot of spin doctoring around this budget. Soundbites such as good news, modest phrases and modernisation are being used by Conservative administration. Do they think that their residents won't catch on to this pay more, get less Conservative council? This budget exposes the mistakes of the Conservative administration. The biggest blunder is not providing adequate SEND places for our children with learning disabilities. Hillingdon Conservatives need to fill a whopping £12 million hole in the DSG, even after the £25 million Boris bailout to avoid bankruptcy. On top of this, Hillingdon Conservatives are risking £13 million to overhaul services from people to digital. It reminds me of when companies exported the call centres overseas, only to find themselves needing to bring them back again. Our residents will see this for what it is. Where is the good news in having to make almost £46 million worth of cuts to our local services? What happened to putting our residents first? Vital services used by our residents north and south of the borough are being drastically cut. Cuts that reduce libraries, ditch our bowls clubs, diminish safety in our communities, and rip out our fantastic training cafe for autistic people. What's next? Our free weekly bin collections? Furthermore, residents should be benefiting from any savings our hard-working officers of this council make. This is not the case with this administration. Instead, Hillingdon residents are to pay 30% more from cradle to grave with this pay more, get less Conservative council. And they have the audacity to call it this modest. What is modest about a maximum rising council tax, a 30% increase in fees and charges, and a staggering £75 to park your car outside your home? We all know that this Conservative administration is not big on consultations, but I am yet to talk to any resident who thinks that these hikes are in any way modest. To call it such is just plain insulting. Madam Mayor, Hillingdon Conservatives will blame inflation, demand-led growth and their need to catch up. The stark reality is that years of Conservative rule has left us with borrowing high and increasing the council's financial risk. Seemingly, the only way to stay afloat is to hike fees and charges, make the largest cuts in recent history and have a panic sale of council's assets. Watch out, green spaces, unaffordable flats are coming. The budget is not good news. It's just another example of Hillingdon's pay more, get less Conservative council.
Thank you, Councillor Punjab. Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One of the things which the Labour group forgot when they were going through their things that were going up was the number of years in which this council has been well run, financially sound, and continuing to provide services that residents do respect and actually request and get delivered on a day-to-day basis exceptionally well, as many of my cabinet colleagues have explained. And sometimes I sit here listening to this, Madam Mayor, and I think, do I actually live and work and operate in a completely different borough to where some of these comments are being come from? But then when we go around the borough, yes, there are differences because of the very nature and the demographics and the situations and the circumstances that are faced upon us. But when you apply all the outstanding pressures that are faced on local authorities, which Councillor Goddard outlined, it's quite clear to me that the overwhelming success of this authority is the fact that it actually recognises what is important to the vast majority of residents. And that is brought home to us every 4 years. And when you look at all the key areas of this borough, where there has been, over the years that I have been a councillor here, fundamental change from time to time. Well, yes, we can see that in Useley we lost ground there. But in Colham and Cowley, we stayed very blue. In Uxbridge, we had the majority of blue. In Hillingdon East, we are blue. And in Hillingdon West, we are blue. And that is the reason because those residents in those key areas, which have the propensity to change from time to time, recognise that what we are offering is good value, is common sense, and is exactly what is to be done. And to support all that is the corporate services which I oversee. So strong have we been in the cuts that the councillor is worried about. Is she going to defend the £1 million savings, which she calls a cut, which we have made in our corporate directors? Does she want that to come back? She gets her vocabulary a bit mixed up, Madam Mayor. And this is exactly the classic Labour thing. Every saving is a cut. The reality it's not. Vast majority of our savings, the vast majority, 90% plus, are efficiencies. They're better ways of doing it. They're modernising. And I noticed from the Hillingdon Labour amendment their willingness to digitalise Hillingdon people, well, that will hold him in good stead as we move forward. But let me just finish on this, Madam Mayor. This authority has gone through an awful lot like of other local authorities in terms of the last 12 months and the burdens that have been put upon it. But this authority's strong financial base enables us to deliver the services that people want at the price that they can afford, and only in Labour authorities is it higher than in Hillingdon.
Thank you, Councillor Mills. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wish to talk about the proposed cuts in funding to large parts of the voluntary sector and the increase in charges for them. And first of all, I must declare an interest in that until recently I did work in the sector, but I am now retired. The proposed cuts to the sector will have a devastating effect to the work that many of these organisations do. Hillingdon has a reputation for having a robust and active sector and carries out many services and activities that benefit the residents that the council are unable to provide. These grants are often small, but are essential to the day-to-day services that they provide. And as we have seen with the issues at the Rural Activities Centre, lead to vulnerable people being given redundancy notices and eventually losing their jobs. That just cannot be right in this day and age. This Conservative Council is undervaluing the sector and its work. Once it's gone, it's very difficult to bring it back. It will drive many organisations away from the borough. For what? You say that you are moving to a commissioning way of doing things. All this will do is drive out the small Hillingdon-based organisations that don't have the capacity and resources to employ legions of bid writers that the larger charities have at hand. The 30% increase in fees will also mean that many of these organisations will also be forced away from Hillingdon. The only way many of them will be able to carry on is by passing on the increase down the line, hurting the people they were meant to be helping. Madam Mayor, the motto of the council is apparently putting residents first. Shouldn't it be changed to charging you all the most? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Councillor Curling.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As I said in my speech on the Labour amendments, this is a challenging budget, and we would be doing things very differently. Our defeated amendment could only scratch the surface and minimise some of the damage that this budget will do to our community. The cuts to our third sector and the move from grants to commission services is another area that we now have clear red water or blue water, depending which side of the aisle we are on. And this year, more than any other, we find the administration's budget to be unpalatable. Indeed, we see this as a huge step away from the previous administration's desire to put residents first, and very much towards a faceless, computer says no authority. The Constitution gives full council the power to take the budget into dispute mode by voting the budget down, and thereby send the budget back to the Cabinet for them to think again. We believe that this budget, more than any in recent years, should be sent back to the Cabinet for them to think again. The leader and Cabinet model of local governance gives the Cabinet the executive power, with every other elected member being the checks and balances of scrutiny. I doubt that there are many members on the Conservative benches that are truly believe that this budget is the best we can do. We will therefore be giving every member in this chamber the opportunity to vote with us to make the Cabinet reconsider the budget, because we cannot vote for or be complicit in the damage that this budget will do, that this budget will no doubt have on our residents. Of course, we would maintain weekly bin collections and all of the other good things, but the hikes in council tax and fees and charges, on top of savage cuts that will see some of our most vulnerable residents suffer, and facilities like the rural activity tea rooms close, really does show that this is the budget of a pay more, get less Conservative administration that has lost its vision and direction and is now just completely desperate. Madam Mayor, they cut into the bone, and it is our residents that bleed, and that is something that we simply cannot support.
Thank you, Councillor Curling. Councillor Santapori.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm concerned to see that there is no separate provision for money to prevent fly tipping in the budget. Fly tipping is an antisocial behavior which a lots of residents complain about it. It often occurs in the area which are built up, like housing estate and area with flats. Fly tipping is very unpleasant for these neighborhoods. If fly tipping is left unattended, it can lead to people to use rogue trader to remove it. Madam Mayor, the budget does not address this continued issue of fly tipping as a separate issue. The increase in bulky waste collection will cause a rise in fly tipping. The ineffective member reporting system will make it hard us to prevent it in a timely manner. The longer fly tipping remains, the more impact it has on the mental health of the community, and the less this council can deliver on the clean spaces. Is it another example of weak leadership and vision for the better Hillingdon? This is another example of budget without any details. Is the absence of money for fly tipping is another cost of saving measure, or just a way of hiding the true amount that occurs? Madam Mayor, I do not support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Santapori. Before I come to Councillor Edwards, is there any other speakers? No. Okay, Councillor Edwards.
Madam Mayor, if I could just remind members, Councillor Edwards is speaking in his capacity as seconder of the original motion, therefore has unlimited speaking time.
Madam Mayor, I won't abuse that privilege, I promise. But I would like to start by congratulating Councillor Goddard on his very thorough budget presentation. We are indeed very fortunate to have a man of his abilities in control of our finances. He's shown complete mastery of his brief, and I congratulate him on the budget. It is an excellent budget, delivered by the financial services officers, and in particular I want to pay tribute to the leadership of Andy Evans, they're the director of our finances. A particularly challenging budget to put together because of the circumstances, not only that, but of the late information coming forwards from the settlement, and I understand that we are still waiting for some information on the settlement this year. It is an excellent budget because it continues to underpin our sound financial management. It contains no cuts to frontline services, contrary to the false assertions said tonight. It supports the continued service improvement. It delivers a strong savings programme to deliver even better value for money. It delivers an extensive capital investment programme, including new facilities. Very sound and robust balance sheets, both for the general fund and for the housing revenue account. Balanced budgets over the next 2 years, no reliance on additional drawdown from reserve. I look forward to seeing the outcome across London from other budgets and to see how we compare. And then we can have a more fuller debate about the effectiveness of our stewardship. And we also will maintain our general reserves, 25% above the new minimum threshold set by the Director of Finance throughout the whole period. The budget will ensure that this council and this borough remain one of the best in the country. In constructing the budget, I know that there was realism to be faced. The single-year settlement was an enormous uncertainty, and as I said, we still await some detail. Hillingdon's comparatively low but sufficient levels of total reserves add up to that background picture, but we don't take more money from residents than we actually need. Part of the realism has also been that the gradual use has been made of those reserves over the last few years, as we have smoothed our spending against the financial impacts of the recent shocks. But now is the time, the realism is that now is the time to rebuild those reserves to meet future and unforeseen economic and financial shocks. Prudence is woven through this budget. Provision has been made in the General Fund for the MTF period, including £60 million for inflation, £23 million for demand-led growth. There is no assumed change to future government funding, only that advised and confirmed today. There is no additional call on reserves, as I've said, and the reserves are maintained at a healthy level. In delivering the budget, constructing the budget, risks have been taken into consideration, and 5 still remain. There is the risk of the cost of living crisis not having fully played out, and the potential for further shortfall in collection rates and demand on services. There is the risk of economic downturn or stagnation that puts pressure on our business rate collection. There is the risk that inflation remains higher and for longer than forecast and above the 4% that is promised to come back to us. And there is obvious risk around pay awards exceeding those that have been prudently budgeted for over the next 5 years. And finally, there is the risk of future changes to government funding formula that have been discussed, and we are unaware of what that impact may be. With these risks ongoing, it is clear that now is the time to be cautious. Now is the time to rebuild reserves. Our savings programme, the budget includes future savings that are not based on imposed targets but on actually identified opportunities. The financial pressures necessitating a significant step change in the savings programme, which we anticipated at the beginning of the last year, and have now expanded that to £45 million over the life of the TFF. The details of the saving programme, which I won't read to you, are listed in paragraph 82. It is full and complete, contrary to the assertions we've heard tonight. They will be delivered around 5 themes: making better use of technology, self-service, automation, robotics, greatly reducing administration costs, increasing productivity, and speeding up service delivery. It will deliver further reduction in management on cost and back office posts. It will deliver more intensive use of assets, reducing our overhead costs. There will be further demand management through early intervention, as Councillor Palmer so passionately spoke out about with the services to our older people. And there will be further delivery of send places in Borough, undermining entirely the false stories and rumours circulating from our colleagues opposite. Further savings programmes will be delivered again through our tighter contract management process. And one that isn't included in our budget, but we will deliver savings on, is around collaboration. These are difficult to quantify, hence why they're not there. But there will undoubtedly be savings from collaboration as we work closer with our NHS partners, exploit the new opportunities provided by the reintroduction of a senior borough-based police officer. With our opportunities to collaborate with our neighbouring authorities, we share our Director of Public Health, and we will look to exploit other opportunities to reduce cost through this means. We are working across London on measures such as the social worker pledge that stops each authority bidding against their colleagues to secure employment of social workers. And we are working regionally. For example, the West London Alliance has just secured £5.2 million to help 2,400 people willing to work, and the Shaw Trust First Job Club is happening in Uxbridge Library imminently. These are opportunities around collaboration that will deliver yet further savings. The funding necessary, though, from residents, and it is increasingly necessary as the council moves away from grant funding of councils, comes from the two sources, both equally important: council tax and fees and charges, and they cannot be considered separately and in isolation, as our colleagues wish to do so. The increase in council tax is no surprise, and it is fair to say that the leader of the Labour group have acknowledged the difficulty of the present budget circumstances and the realism around the rise in council tax, and I am grateful to that. As Councillor Goddard has advised, we will continue to be the lowest Band D council tax rate, second lowest in Outer London. And let's just put a little bit of a flavour. I don't like to use too many numbers, but all councils will be raising their council tax by 4.99%, and residents will think that is broadly everybody's going to be paying the same, but they're not. In Hillingdon, it's £63.32 in a year. In Ealing, it's 5% higher. Not a great deal, but it's 5%, £66.75. Hounslow, it's 8% higher. And Harrow, 29% higher, the rise this year. The fees and charges, it has been necessary to increase the fees and charges. But I've not heard with the same passion from our colleagues opposite their concerns about this being expressed when the discussion was around ULEZ and the £12.50 a day charge that is going to come onto a high number of our residents. They were silent at that point. The budget report describes the comparative income from fees and charges for Hillingdon and London authorities. It notes that the average Outer London Borough funds considerably more of their service spend from fees and charges than in Hillingdon, because ours have been historically so low. The three nearest neighbours raise more than double the amount than in Hillingdon. Even following our step change in fees and charges, the amount raised per household or per resident will remain comfortably below our immediate neighbours and remain amongst our lowest in London, and will help to underpin and sustain our service delivery. I agree with Councillor Goddard that the general principle is that the consumer of elected service should pay for it. We recognise the importance of the car use in outer London, and that is why we are implacably opposed to ULEZ. We've changed our drop curb policy to allow more residents to charge vehicles at home and off street. But the cost to creating, managing and enforcing a parking management scheme, the cost should be borne to a greater extent by those that directly benefit from that scheme. And it is right to introduce the charge for the first permit. That brings us in line with every other local authority. The parking revenue account does not deliver the surpluses necessary to fund our road improvement and maintenance programme that we aspire to. With the increase in parking charges, we will retain amongst the lowest overall parking charges in London and allow us to continue the high level of investment in our roads without undermining other service delivery. And contrary to the assertions we've heard about us not supporting the third sector, let me say that we provide £1.6 million in grant funding in this year. More than 1% of our council tax is gifted to our third sector and voluntary groups because we recognise the importance of the service they provide to residents. But it is, and to my knowledge, I know of no other London local authority that spends anywhere near that amount, and certainly our near neighbours have no equivalent. But it is wholly unrealistic to have expected us to have funded the full £2 million that was sought by the sector, and choices had to be made. The budget sets out a very strong investment programme, and that has been expanded on, and I'm not going to go through great detail, but I will just capture a bit. £368 million capital investment over 5 years is a substantial sum of money, 200 of which is in new or expanded infrastructure. I doubt there will be another local authority in the country that over the next 5 years will deliver a new outdoor water activity centre, £20 odd million, new leisure centre and swimming pool, 50 megawatt solar farm, 2 new larger libraries, £35 million worth of investment in roads and schools, in roads and pavements, more local send places, more and better council housing, as well as our usual chrysalis, our park and playgrounds, our enhancement of the facilities for the uniformed youth groups. I am proud of the investment that we continue as an administration to make in our borough to improve the services and facilities for our residents. And with our housing revenue account, the good news continues. Inflationary pressures have squeezed those services and the investment plans, and it is necessary to raise the rents by the 7% to prevent deterioration to existing stock and a reduction of the planned build of new council homes moving forwards. The £500 million investment plan contains nearly £200 million improvement of existing stock, with the priority being the efficiency of those homes replacing boilers, double glazing, insulation, lofts and walls, all the green things that we've heard are so important. Another priority, though, is tackling the damp and mould. Again, what we've heard is important. And we haven't overlooked our responsibility for safety of our tenants. £200 million to build or acquire new dwellings, a commitment to increase our stock of council homes by 100 per year. £161 million estate regeneration, delivering 370 new council homes, a net increase of 72 by the end of 27-28. And a further programme of new estate regeneration is being worked up. In conclusion, Madam Mayor, the budget is a financial expression of our intentions and the transformative vision for the council and our services to the residents. Labour's budget had the opportunity to set out their own vision, but their only product was a nitpicking of our budget, funded by a callous tax rise on the over 70s. There is a clear distinction between our sound financial management, innovation and optimism against Labour's tax and spend pessimism and their incompetence. And now I will add nastiness. I will add tonight the promise that Hillingdon Conservatives will continue to support our older people. We will not remove or reduce the existing discount scheme, whereas that is clearly not safe under Labour. Our budget shows that this administration will not evade difficult decisions, and the improvement in services that have been outlined, together with our ambitious investment programme in facilities and housing, shows that we continue to put all residents first. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Goddard.
Madam Mayor, thank you. The debate this evening has been extensive and exhaustive, to say nothing of exhausting. Hence, I will not detain members long with my final comments. The proposals in front of us have been developed over an extensive period of time, with deliberation, care and challenge. As a prudent, diligent and careful administration which takes great account of financial stability, in essence, our choices have been limited. In the absence of inflation-matching government funding and the regime of capped council tax increases at rates well below prevailing inflation, we have had little choice but to address the challenge with a substantial savings programme and reforms to our fees and charges structures. But as said by many on this side, that has not resulted in cuts to key frontline services. What this budget gives us is a sound, stable financial position, and that is absolutely critical to our continued ability to serve and support our residents. In spite of these changes, Hillingdon still offers one of the best deals to residents, both in terms of the quality and reach of our services and the great value in terms of what we ask people to pay. We've used our inherent balance sheet strength to prime the pump with further investment plans. Madam Mayor, this is a budget in which we can all take great civic pride, and I commend it to members. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One more final recorded vote before we conclude this evening. I should be asking members in alphabetical order if you are approving the adoption of the Cabinet recommendations to Council as set out on pages 3 to 5 of the order of business, moved by Councillor Goddard, seconded by Councillor Edwards, against those recommendations or abstaining. Councillor Abbey.
To protect residents, I'll vote against the motion.
Councillor Banerjee. Councillor Bassett. Councillor Bennett. Councillor Batt. Councillor Bianco. Councillor Bridges. Councillor Burles.
Against.
Councillor Burrows. Councillor Rita Chamdal. Councillor Roy Chamdal. Councillor Chapman. Councillor Tubadar. Councillor Cawthorne. Councillor Curling. Councillor Davies. Councillor Dennis. Councillor Dott. Councillor Edwards. Councillor Farley. Councillor Gardner. Councillor Gaelic. Councillor Garg. Councillor Gill. Councillor Goddard. Councillor Gohill. Councillor Higgins. Councillor Islam.
Against.
Councillor Judge.
Against.
Councillor Kaur. Councillor Lavery. Councillor Lewis. Councillor Makwana, Councillor Mand, Councillor Mathers, Councillor D. Mills, Councillor R. Mills, Councillor Money, Councillor Nelson, Councillor Nelson West, Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Palmer, Councillor Punja, Councillor Riley, Councillor Sansapuri, Councillor Singh, Councillor Smallwood, Councillor Sullivan, Councillor Tuckwell, Mr Deputy Mayor, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. The budget recommendations are carried by 30 votes to 21.
Thank you very much. That concludes tonight's meeting. I know it is late, but you are still invited to the parlour after the meeting. Thank you very much.